Well, today I have an amazing guest. And as I always open up my podcasts, I always say, we're going deep. And today we are doing a deep dive with this lovely lady, amazing woman, Donna Andersen. She is the author of Love Fraud. And this lovefraud.com is her website. And I will be promoting it on the artwork that you see once you see the podcast released. So don't panic. You're going to have all her information when you need it. But she teaches people to recognize and recover from sociopaths and host. She is the host of the True Love Fraud Stories podcast, which will also be promoted. She is also the author of 8 books, including Seniors Sociopaths, How to Recognize and Escape Lifelong Abusers, Red Flags of Love Fraud, and the 4-part best of the Love Fraud blog series. Donna learned about sociopaths the hard way by marrying one. She tells the story of how outrageous this situation. I mean, it was an outrageous story in her first book, Love Fraud. Donna founded Love Fraud Education and Recovery, which offers webinars to help survivors and professionals identify, escape, and recover from sociopaths, including narcissists, psychopaths, and other manipulators. She is co-founder of 2 scientific papers and has presented research to the Society for the Scientific Study of Psychopathy. My goodness, I'm having a little tongue twist there. So forgive me, Donna. Donna has appeared on television shows including Love, Honor, Betray, Deadly Women, and Who the Bleep Did I Marry? All on Investigation Discovery. She also appeared on Insight in Australia and ABC News 2020. My Life is a Lifetime Movie, Handsome Devils, and The Ricky Lake Show. She has also been interviewed for multiple radio shows, podcasts, print articles, and web posts. Donna graduated from Syracuse University with degrees in psychology and journalism. And Donna is also very happily remarried, proving that recovery from betrayal is possible. Oh my goodness, I'm so honored. I am so grateful that you could spare the time to join me today for Colli Talks Transformative Conversations. Welcome, Donna. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
I'm so glad to be here, Colli. Thank you for inviting me to join you.
Oh, yes, your experience, your story, your everything is just so needed in the world right now. And I mean, it always has been. It's just that these things have become, now known for many women that in fact are hurting, right? So you became a leading voice in helping people recognize and recover from sociopaths. So
Wait.
that's okay. That's
Can you
okay.
go pause?
It's okay.
Yeah.
We're
I don't
good.
know. Somebody's at the door.
Okay, that's okay.
We'll just start. Let me see. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Nope, that's fine. All good. We do it raw and real here, so it's not a problem. We will just keep rolling when you get back. It's called life happens, right, people? Life happens while we're making plans or while we're doing other things, and everything happens for a reason. So Donna will be back with us in a moment. She's just getting a parcel or getting some information, or I don't know, maybe getting some visitors. We'll just take it as it comes. And I know that when she returns, she will have a lot to offer in terms of the information, in terms of insights, in terms of what she's been through and how she can assist others, such as yourself, that may be going through this or have already gone through it and are on the other side of it. So I'm just excited to have her. And it's an honor to have people with this amazing insight to bring to us. So anyway, here we go. I hear her coming back now.
Sorry about that. The mailman came with
That's okay.
packages.
No worries, Donna. I was just saying everything happens for a reason in perfect timing. So I was just mentioning that you've become a leading voice in helping people recognize and recover from sociopaths. And I was wondering if you could take us back to where it all began. Like what happened in your personal life that led you to start lovefraud.com?
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, you did mention in the introduction
Mm-hmm.
that I found out about sociopaths by marrying one.
Right?
And so, yes, I married this man who took $250,000 from me. He
Wow.
cheated with at least six different women during our 2.5 year involvement. He had a child with one of those women. And then 10 days after I left him, not 10 days after a divorce, but 10 days after I left him, he married the mother of the child, which was the second time he committed bigamy. So, uh,
Wow.
of course, I didn't know all this right away, but as I found out about what he was really doing that I didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
I was working with an energy therapist at the time, and I told her, he did this, he did this, he did this. And she says, he sounds like a sociopath. And I'm
Oh,
like, sociopath? What's that? And so I started looking it up, doing some research. And once I found out more about the personality disorder, then yes, he definitely qualified. And because of my experience, I founded lovefraud.com almost 20 years ago now, back in
wow.
2005. Yeah, it's been that long. And then I started writing books. And so here we are.
Oh my goodness, what an experience. Like, I mean, it's almost takes my breath away in terms of how under the cover all that goes and we, because I've had experience as well, how we don't see, feel, or know it, right? At the time. I mean, we're just so elsewhere. And
Well, yes. And this was, as I said, well, I started Love Fraud 20 years ago. So this
mhm,
happened. I met the man in 1996.
right,
And that was before there was like functional internet. I mean,
right.
we had a little bit, we had AOL. In fact, I met him on AOL, love it AOL, one of
Mhm,
those.
mhm,
But at the time, there was no way to research anybody,
right,
like there is now.
right.
So, and I was clueless. I mean, here I was a journalist. I was running a business for many years, and I had no idea, about these personality disorders. So it's been an education process. So what happened was I launched lovefraud.com, and my original intention was to warn people about con artists because
Okay.
that's essentially what this man was. He was a con artist. And what I learned is that the personality disorders it's much more than just taking money from people. And, I learned more about what the disorders are.
Mhm,
And essentially, these people, sociopaths, their primary interest is power and control.
okay.
And they are predators and they are exploiters. And essentially, anybody that they have any meaningful involvement with ends up damaged. And that's exactly what happened to me.
Right.
So the thing is, though, it's not just monetary, although, plenty of them are looking for money, but they could be looking for sex, they could be
Mhm.
looking for a place to live, they could be looking for somebody to do their chores or take care of their kids. And probably the most despicable of the sociopaths are those who do it just to entertain themselves.
Oh my
Yes, because I have heard of plenty of people, especially later, in recent years when people are meeting someone online, a long distance relationship,
mhm.
and a sociopath will tell them how much they love them, promise them the world, talk about getting together. They're going to have this wonderful life. And, the target might be kind of suspicious, but, they keep pouring it on, keep pouring it on. So finally the target falls for it. And then the sociopath disappears.
Ah,
So the whole thing, it's the catfishing story. The
mhm.
whole thing is just to entertain themselves by getting someone to fall in love with them and then hurt them.
Ah,
So I've heard many, many stories like that.
it's totally totally appalling. Totally.
Yes,
Oh my,
it is.
it's just disgusting, right? That human humans become into this, right? It's just really appalling. It is. Oh God. Your first book, Love Fraud. I mean, it's obviously very deeply personal. And what was it like to, turn your experience with a sociopath into a published story for the whole world to read?
It's kind of interesting because my background is journalism, and you
Right?
talked about that. And for many years, when I was a journalist and then when I was doing commercial work,
Hmm.
people would always say, "Do you want to write a book?" I'm like, "No, that's too much work. I don't want to write a book." And so what happened was when this experience happened to me, I was like, I'm, smart enough of a journalist to realize that I had this amazing story,
Right?
so I decided I was going to write it. And, the full title of the book is Love Fraud: How Marriage to a Sociopath Fulfilled My Spiritual Plan,
Okay.
because that's exactly what it was. The book reads like a cross between a spiritual journey and a true crime novel.
Wow.
And yes, so I told in all the detail what happened to me in meeting this person and how I was seduced and everything. And multiple other women, because I was not the only victim.
Right.
It turned out that this is the way this man lived his life. And so I also told the stories of about, 5 other women that he did the same thing to and took money from the 5 of us, he took over $1 million.
Wow.
And yeah, but at the same time, when this was happening to me, I had already begun somewhat of a spiritual quest, mostly trying to find answers of why I was still single at age 40
Hmm.
and, unable to make a connection. So I was already working with an energy therapist at the time. I had been working with her, and thank goodness, because, when this all happened, I certainly needed a lot of assistance.
Oh, for sure.
Yes, but what I found was that there was a spiritual purpose to the experience. And that was like the whole learning lesson. And essentially it was something that my soul had planned.
Hmm.
And essentially because I learned that I had many past lives with my ex-husband.
Okay.
And this time around, essentially, I set a goal for myself, a spiritual goal for myself, to end the involvement with him. And the way the universe does that, I learned, is that they bring them back
Oh,
and they make this terrible experience. And, that it's so awful that you have to put an end to it. And that's essentially what happened.
amazing. Wow. I'm that's like yeah, but it totally makes sense.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
it really
because
does.
essentially, I mean, I was able working with my therapist, we were able to get glimpses of the
Mhm.
past lives. I think I write about 20 of them, in the book, different times that I had been involved with my ex-husband over the centuries, because the original incident goes back, shortly around the time of Christ.
Right?
And so what happened was, when I was working with her, I was able to, kind of see it. And it kind of, it's like seeing a dream is how my experience of it was.
Okay.
But I was talking to her perhaps once a month, and it simply wasn't enough, for what I was going through.
Right.
So I started being able to, work on it on my own and develop the ability to channel messages. And, so I was getting all these messages and, being able to see things and all this other stuff. And then the therapist would, validate, what I had experienced. And it was just amazing. But the
Wow.
bottom line was that the purpose of it was for me to let it all go.
Right.
Because essentially what happened was that, in all those different lifetimes, I kept trying to fix him, kept trying to make
Mm.
it so that, he would make up for all the things that he did to me, because
Right.
he was, raping, murdering, taking advantage, all that other stuff. And in the end, the solution was to let it go and
Mhm.
to get his hook out of my heart.
Oh,
And that was the object of the exercise, and I was able to do that.
amazing. I was gonna ask you with, in your work you use the like the term sociopath, right? Can you explain for our listeners, well, now your listeners, what this means? I mean, how is it How does it differ from narcissists or psychopaths?
Okay, well, here comes all the confusing definitions.
Yeah, please
Uh,
help us out here.
okay, so the bottom line is that the mental health profession does not necessarily agree on what to call people and what terms to use and how the diagnostic criteria should be described.
Okay.
So the word sociopath originally meant anything unstable and difficult in social relations, anything deviant in social relations, somebody who had problems, with other people. That was the
Hmm.
original meaning of the term when it was coined back in 1930.
Oh, okay.
And yes, so then eventually in 1952, the American Psychiatric Association published the first edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is essentially the Bible for
Right.
therapists and psychiatrists. And at that time, there was a listing called sociopathic personality disturbance. Okay, so
Okay.
that was like in 1952. Then, like in 1968, they come out with the next edition of the book and they get rid of that term and they create antisocial personality disorder.
Mm.
So what has happened is that, of course, you can't call somebody an antisocial personality disorder. so therapists tend to use the word sociopath as shorthand for antisocial personality disorder,
Mm.
although clinically the word sociopath has no meaning anymore. There is no official diagnosis of sociopath.
Really?
So
Mm.
no, there
Okay.
is no diagnosis. So, but what there is, or what they call in the DSM-5, which is now the fifth edition, they have a group of what they call cluster B disorders. And those include antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. And what these disorders have in common is that they tend to be overly emotional, kind of unpredictable. And so they kind of just group them into a condition, a cluster.
Okay.
At the same time, there's the term psychopathy. And so that word was also used back in for a long time. They used to call it actually they called anything psychopathology. So that gets all confusing too.
Right.
But psychopathy was used in the research field. So there was a guy by the name of Dr. Robert Hare who
Yes.
developed, okay, you may have heard of him. He was
Hmm.
Canadian. He developed what's called the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, which
Okay.
is the first time that there was a way to measure someone's level of psychopathy. He developed it specifically because he worked in the prison systems and he wanted to try and predict which people would, when released, reoffend. I mean, that was
Okay.
the whole purpose of the thing. But in the meantime, his work has been validated for hundreds of research studies. And so the way he has of diagnosing it works, essentially, is what it amounts to.
Okay.
So at one point, this is why it's so complicated. At one point, he suggested including the term psychopathy in the DSM-5, but for political reasons, they decided not to do that. So essentially now what we have is the therapists and the psychiatrists on one side who use the cluster B terminology, which is antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, and histrionic, and then all the research people who use psychopathy. And I mean, psychopath is not an official diagnosis either.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's a mess. So anyway, I use the term sociopath as it was originally intended, as just describing anybody who has difficulty in social relations,
Hmm.
the people who are exploiters and manipulators. Their antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy are close, but not the same. And then, there's a lot of overlap among pretty much all these disorders. In
Okay.
fact, my colleague, Dr. Leanne Needham, was just explaining that people can be comorbid. That means you can have them at the same time. So you can have antisocial, you can have narcissistic, you can have borderline all at the same time. And when you do, what you are seeing is traits of psychopathy. So
Wow.
as you can see, it's a mess.
Yeah.
And I use the term sociopath to talk about all of them because what we need to know is that these are serious personality disorders. The
Mhm.
people who have them are unlikely to recover. There's virtually no chance once you're an adult that there is recovery, with the possible exception of borderline. And we just need to know that they're dangerous and they're out there, and we need to protect ourselves from all of them.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
so yes, so that's why I like to talk about all of them collectively
Yeah,
using
yeah, for
the
sure.
umbrella term, right, of sociopath.
Well, thank you
Uh,
so much because, like it's like you say,
it's a mess,
it's a mess.
and it's a mess, and the number of people who have these disorders
Mhm.
probably is 12% of the population.
Whoa.
So there are millions of them out there. They are in all demographic groups: male, female, rich, poor, all races, all religions,
Mhm.
all education levels. And, people need to know that they're out there,
Mhm.
because you can run into them any place. And so we need to know. I mean, this is actually the love fraud's biggest job, is just letting people know that they exist. I
Right.
mean, I tell you how many times people have said to me after they've been decimated, by some
Yeah,
experience, that I never knew people like this existed. And
exactly.
yes, and so that's job number one for love fraud, is that yes, they do exist. They're 12% of the population, and here's the warning signs, and you need to know that they're out there.
Well, I'm, you know, not surprised, but I am. It's funny because when you mentioned Dr. Hare, a colleague of his actually was my psychologist after I had been through a relationship where this person had attempted to murder me. And
Oh dear.
yeah, so he was the one who introduced me to Without a Conscience
Okay.
and Snakes in Suits, right? And
Mhm.
interestingly enough, when you said what you just said about it's it took me I don't know how many sessions to get the fact, and then reading Without a Conscience not once but twice, to really get to the point where I could go, wow, there are people out there without a conscience.
Right.
Like, yeah. And so, what are some of the most common red flags that people miss when they're being manipulated by a sociopath, especially in romantic relationships? What are some red flags?
Well, I happen to have written a book about that
Okay,
called
yeah.
Red Flags of Love Fraud: 10 Signs You're Dating a Sociopath.
Okay,
And the book was based on research,
right?
because what I did was a survey of love fraud readers. And, I had been talking to people and kept hearing the same type of experiences over and over again.
Mhm,
So I wanted to essentially test to see, what was most common.
right?
And so the number one sign that somebody might be a sociopath is charisma and charm. And what
Oh,
that means is that, they have this appealing energy about them. They seem to be very exciting. They always know what to say. They're smooth talkers, never miss a beat. So that's like the first one that just about everybody sees.
mhm.
Uh, then the next thing that people reported was sudden soulmates. You meet this person, and all of a sudden you feel like you've met the person you've been waiting for all your life. You have
Oh,
so much in
wow.
common. And essentially, the reason for that is because sociopaths will study you, figure out what you're looking for, and then make themselves into that person.
Oh,
So consequently, that's what you feel. That's why you feel like you've met what Prince Charming is,
oh
because
my
you told
god.
him or her what Prince or Princess Charming looks like, and
Mhm.
magically they become that. So the next red flag is sexual magnetism. Many, many people have told me that the sex with sociopaths was out of this world and just earth moving. And the reason for that is because all sociopaths, both male and female, have very high levels of testosterone. So
Oh,
that makes them, want to pursue sexual encounters. And, they start early, they do it often, so they tend to be very experienced. And so it often is kind of amazing.
oh
And then
my.
you've probably heard this term. This is the fourth red flag. It's called love bombing.
Yeah.
And right. And what that means is that the sociopaths will shower you with attention and affection and tell you how wonderful you are and put you up on a pedestal so that you're so high in the air, it's like you can't breathe.
Mm.
And, so those are, some important red flags. The problem, of course, is all of those red flags sound like a dream date,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
right, right. So
Oh.
it's like, who doesn't want to meet someone who's charismatic and charming and thinks you're wonderful and is sexy and is pouring on the affection. I mean, that sounds
Mm-hmm.
fabulous. So the next red flag is very important, and they blame other people for everything.
Oh.
Nothing is ever their fault. They never take responsibility. And, this one is really important, because it's something that you will tend to see early on because, one of the things that sociopaths do is they hide themselves. They can, when necessary, make themselves out to be charming and charismatic and fun and considerate and, Prince Charming and all this other stuff. But they do tend to do this blaming thing and not taking responsibility.
Mm.
So, and I've got, 5 more red flags, but the idea is that you kind of need to see the whole pattern.
Right.
If you meet somebody who's charismatic and charming, that by itself doesn't mean that they're a sociopath.
Right.
But if they're charismatic and charming and they're telling you that you're soulmates and they're sweeping you off your feet and love bombing you and they're sexy and they're blaming other people for everything, then you should start paying attention and do your homework to see, what this person, what else this person may be doing and if this person has all the traits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And run.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
With the authoring of 8 books, which is amazing, congratulations, and a 4-part blog series on these topics. For someone, just starting to suspect, right, that they may have been targeted, where would you recommend they begin?
Well, I would suggest that they go to Love Fraud, and
Mhm.
I have a checklist on Love
Okay.
Fraud.
Okay.
And they can just do the checklist. And I think it's got about 30 items on it. And if you see like most of the person you're involved with has most of these traits and characteristics and behaviors, then you might be dealing with someone who's disordered.
Okay. And with senior sociopaths, right? You dive into lifelong abusers. What makes these individuals different? Like what are the long-term patterns of harm they cause?
Well, the reason that I wrote this book, Senior Sociopaths, is because the conventional wisdom in the mental health field is that sociopaths burn out, by the time they're 40.
Oh.
Not true.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, my ex-husband was 55 when I met him.
Oh.
And then, I was with him for 2 years and he took all my money and then I divorced him. And then he did the same thing to multiple other women after me.
Right.
So, yeah, the guy never stopped. And I was hearing the same thing from other people as well. So again, what I did was a survey, an internet survey on SurveyMonkey. And I had I think it was close to 2,200 responses on this. And I
Wow.
specifically asked about people's observations of someone who they suspected was a sociopath and was age 50 or older.
Okay.
And I selected age 50 because, if they burn out in their 40s, by 50 they should be calmed down. So
Right.
okay, that's where we'll start. And about half of the people, well, first of all, any kind of relationship was okay. This wasn't limited to romantic partners, although most of the people who replied, talked about either romantic partners or former spouses or current spouses, but also people talked about their parents, talked about siblings, talked about work colleagues, business associates. So about half of the people that filled out the survey knew the individual both before and after the age of 50. And the question that I asked was, after age 50, did you notice that this person engaged in less deceit, manipulation, and antisocial behavior?
Mhm.
Well, 91% said their deceit manipulation, and antisocial behavior was just as bad or worse after
Wow.
age 50. So the bottom line is that once they are adults, sociopaths do not change. They do not get better. They do not get a conscience. They do not learn how to love. And you need to know this
Mm-hmm.
because, I mean, I've talked to people who've been involved with these individuals for, 20, 30, and 40 years and, kept hoping and praying for change. It's not going to happen. So,
No.
once you realize what you're dealing with, you need to figure out a way to protect yourself. Either
Mm-hmm.
get out of the relationship or if that's impossible, still to figure out a way to protect yourself.
Right. Pick up the pieces, right?
Mhm.
Pick up the
Yes.
pieces. Yeah. And you've founded the Love Fraud Education and Recovery to support survivors and professionals. So, can you share more about the types of support and resources you provide?
That program is webinars. And
Okay.
so we have multiple webinars ranging from how to report the sociopath so the police take you seriously,
Mm-hmm.
to dealing with parental alienation, to how to recover from complex PTSD. And we have a really wonderful program. I mentioned my colleague, Dr. Leanne Leadham, who's a
Right.
psychiatrist. This program we put together last year, and it's skills training for overcoming gaslighting and manipulation. And what she has done is there's a type of therapy called a DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. You may have heard of that. It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty. What she did is take the skills training aspect of that therapy and tailor it specifically for people who have endured narcissistic abuse.
Okay.
So we have a really nice program that essentially teaches the DBT skills so that you can survive and recover. Like there's two survival principles that we talk about. I mean, that's the foundation of what we do. The first survival principle is if you're dealing with somebody like this, you don't want to make it worse. You don't want
Mm-hmm.
to make your situation worse. So,
Right.
yes. And, unfortunately, many people do. People get so emotional and just pushed to the edge that they do something stupid and they end up getting arrested, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. So you need to be able to bring down your emotional upset if that's what's going on, that's making you lash out or something. So we have a lot of techniques for doing that.
Okay.
um, then we have techniques for dealing with emotional distress, and then the main thing is that we teach mindfulness skills,
Oh,
because
wonderful.
essentially what happens, and the reason that we get into these situations is because we're not being mindful. We're not really observing what's going on. We're not observing how we feel. We're not observing, what this person is really doing. So that's the foundation of it is teaching mindfulness skills. So it's like, I think we have 13 weeks of training.
Wow,
For,
wonderful.
yes, yes. Although now it's all recorded, so people can go at whatever their pace is. But
Right.
it's like 13 webinars, and so that's a really wonderful program, and it's training that is not available anywhere else.
Yeah, I was just going to say I haven't heard of anything like that. So it's great that you're sharing that with the audience because there are people out there that I know will be will
Yeah.
be checking into it. And I was going to ask you, Donna, with regards to, you've had so many public the public appearances from the Deadly Women to 2020. What for you has been most impactful or surprising even as, media experience for you?
Well, I've been, told my story 3 times on Investigation Discovery. Well, actually, twice on Investigation Discovery. The other was My Life Was a Lifetime movie.
Hmm.
So, it was kind of interesting to have that experience,
Right.
work with a production company and be on TV, and it helps. I mean, I've had plenty of people contact me after seeing the shows, and it's been going on for years now. I think the first one, Who the Bleep Did I Marry, was the first show, and that came out in 2012. And they keep running. They keep running the
Hmm.
episodes, and people keep finding it, and they keep identifying with the story, and they find love fraud, and so it helps people. One of the big things that it helps people to understand is that they are not alone,
Right.
because often what happens is these experiences are so insane and and often people try to tell their friends and family what's going on and they can't hear it. They simply cannot listen to it. It's just they say, "Oh, you must be exaggerating. It can't be that bad." Well, it is that bad, you
Hmm.
know? And so what has been gratifying is that people have found the shows and realized that they aren't alone and that and even more importantly, there is a reason for the experience. And the reason is that the person is a sociopath and this is what they are and this is what they do. So it just helps people to, often get on that journey to try and figure out exactly what happened and then also to learn that recovery is possible.
Right. Yeah, it is. And with that, I was going to ask you, so many survivors struggle to trust again. And as someone who is now happily remarried, what advice can you give to listeners who are afraid to even begin to think about love again after betrayal?
The key is the emotional recovery.
Okay.
And, I mean, what happens is that understanding on an intellectual level what you're dealing with is important and it's the first step.
Hmm.
But the betrayal and the pain is emotional. And so that's what has to come out. And that's something that I work with people all the time because, I've also developed the ability to kind of key in on what someone else is feeling, even though we're doing it over Zoom or
Right.
a phone call. And so it's important to get to the energetic disturbances because all these betrayals, all the pain, all the wounds create energetic disturbances. And, they're stuck in your aura. In my case, they were stuck in my aura for multiple lifetimes
Right.
and they have to come out. And so how do you do that? Well, you allow yourself to actually experience the pain. You allow yourself to cry. You allow yourself to feel anger appropriately, never to the person because that's useless.
Right.
Um, but I recommend punching bags, you know,
Yeah.
and my personal favorite was envisioning my ex-husband's face in a pillow and beating it until I collapsed.
Hmm.
That works wonders. It does great. So, but that's what has to happen is that we need to get at those energetic disturbances and get them out of our system, and that's the healing process. So I recommend that people do the emotional work. It's not fun. It's not pretty. It can take some time, because often what happens is that there are multiple layers of pain and multiple layers of wounds,
Right.
because essentially what sociopaths do is they target vulnerabilities. So typically something has happened previously that made the sociopath made the person vulnerable to the sociopath to begin with.
Right.
I find that lots of people have had previous dysfunctional marriages, dysfunctional relationships, and also many people realize that they've gotten involved with somebody who was just like their mother or father.
Hmm.
So there are plenty of disordered people, who have these childhood experiences and they're, those wounds are very deep and
Oh, for
they're all
sure.
hanging around. Yes, they're all hanging around in the aura, just like the more recent ones. So the real recovery is when you can keep going back, going back, going back, and finding those original wounds and addressing them and
Hmm.
allowing yourself to actually feel the pain and let get it out of your system. So that's half of it, and the
Right.
other half is that you allow yourself to experience joy. So,
Oh,
on the one hand, you want to be getting the pain and the negative energy out of your system, but as you release that energy, it kind of creates a void. So you want to fill that void with anything that brings you joy, anything that brings you
wonderful.
happy.
I
Yes. And
love it.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
absolutely. And I would think that, the joy has been something that was missing in that person's life for a very long time, or they wouldn't have filled it up with the other, right? So,
Well, yes and no. Essentially, what happens is, you want to shift your internal balance.
right.
Yes. And so, people did have these negative experiences and everything. I mean, people still have good experiences,
Hmm.
but they can be, overwhelmed, when with the negative experiences. So, the goal is to change your internal balance so that, you start feeling more positive, feeling like more happier,
Hmm.
more willing to experience joy. I mean, whatever brings you joy, going for a walk with the dog, watching
Yeah.
a good movie, reading a book, whatever it is. And, the more you can do that, the more you release the negative energy, which means there's nothing for future sociopaths to latch onto.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting. It's so interesting that it's like moth to a flame, right? It's
yes,
just this, and they're just in there. Like,
right,
I mean, it doesn't even have to be you're in the same room. It could be through the phone, or it could be, worlds apart. But somehow, some way, that attraction happens, right? It it
correct.
it amazes me. It really
Yeah.
does, and it is like you say, it's energy.
Mhm,
It's that vulnerability that's there, that woundedness,
mhm,
and that void, so that it gets filled up with not such good things.
mhm.
you know, in your opinion, why do so many women and men, I'm not just, not just women, but why do they continue to stay, in these kinds of abusive or manipulative relationships, even maybe when the red flags are kind of clear?
Well, often what happens is that they are trauma bonded to the individual,
Okay.
and this is a biological phenomenon. And what happens is that all relationships are essentially psychological bonds,
Right.
and the bond is established in the beginning through pleasure. And, when you meet a sociopath and they're charming and exciting and sexy and pouring on the, love bombing, there's a lot of pleasure there. But then what happens is that the sociopath tends to do something that creates fear and anxiety. And typically it's fear and anxiety of losing the relationship. Like, they blow you off, they, snap out at you, they accuse you of something, you discover that they're lying to you, something like that.
Right.
And this is, of course, very upsetting, but it creates the fear and anxiety, and the fear and anxiety actually strengthens the bond that you feel.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So then what happens is that, you approach this person because you want to go back to how wonderful it was, before this happened. You might have some kind of resolution, you kiss and make up, and the bond strengthens again. And
Mm.
so this becomes a vicious circle where you have the pleasure, then you have fear and anxiety, then you have reconciliation. And with each turn of the wheel, the psychological bond that you feel gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And so this is why, people often stay in these relationships. Like people are always criticizing domestic violence victims. Well, why don't you just leave? Well,
Mm.
you can't, because of the trauma bond that brings you, closer and closer to this person. So that's why somehow you got to start, and often it's somebody finally hits rock bottom, where they realize it's like get out or die,
Right.
something along those lines. But that's the reason, is because of the trauma bonds that form with these individuals.
Wow. Really amazing. I just, the whole thing around the trauma bond, right? When does that trauma bond originate? Is that something that originates usually in childhood, like the beginning?
No, the trauma bond, well, there can be from
Hmm.
childhood experiences, but the trauma bond is specific to whoever the abuser is.
Right.
So the way it works is that there are two aspects of it. There is a power differential, meaning
Oh,
that one person in the relationship has more power than the other person. And
okay.
typically what that means is that one person is less invested in the relationship and more willing to walk away, which
Mm.
is typically the sociopath. So the other person, really wants the relationship and will do whatever they have to accommodate and appease and something like that. So that's the power differential. Then the other thing
Oh,
that happens is intermittent reinforcement. So what happens is that, the target may do something, and sometimes the sociopath rewards them for that, and sometimes they don't. So intermittent reinforcement is the strongest type of conditioning.
oh my
And so
goodness.
Yeah, so this is what happens. And, people have asked, did the sociopaths know? I mean, they're doing this intentionally. And I
Mm-hmm.
think not. I think it's just instinctive
Mm-hmm.
uh, or through trial and error because, they spend their whole lives doing this. So they figure out what works. But essentially, so that's what happens is that first there's a power differential, then there's this intermittent reinforcement. And this is what creates the trauma bond.
Wow. Oh, amazing. It's so amazing. I mean, amazing in a way that it's just mind blowing.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm wondering how listeners, how do you begin to rebuild your self-worth and reclaim your power after being targeted by this?
Well, exactly what I said. First, educate yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and an important concept is to recognize that none of what happened is your fault. You did not turn this person into a sociopath. I mean, they typically say that you did,
Yeah.
I mean, I just did a one of my true love fraud story podcasts was about this woman. The guy kept telling her, "Well, I'm going to kill myself because of you," and that's actually kind of common, in that they're laying down a guilt trip or
Oh
something
my
like that.
God.
Yes. So anyhow, but the key to understand is that you did not create it. This person did not do this stuff because of you, and nothing you ever could have done would have made them treat you any better. Okay? So that's the first thing. It's not your fault.
Right.
And then the next thing you need to do is essentially to get away. Hopefully you can. There are situations where you're married to a person with kids and it gets complicated, but if you can totally get away, you want to do that and then have no contact. And then the longer you can stay away from this person, the more their grip on you will dissipate.
Right.
And then you want to do the healing process that I talked about as far as, working on your emotional recovery. It does get more complicated, when you've got kids and co-parenting and things like that. So that's actually one of the reasons why our program is helpful
Mm-hmm.
because it gives you the tools even when you have to have some level of contact with the person. It gives you the tools to, figure out how to be mindful about it and how to address distressing situations. And also we have, a couple of segments on how to deal with a sociopath,
Mm-hmm.
with, ways that have been proven to work. So that's, that is helpful as well.
I've heard, and I don't know if it's true, but is it such that once the couple, the people sort of, fall apart or one leaves, and that you're kind of safer when they actually, you're kind of really safe when they've actually got another, I hate to say it, but another victim.
Yes and no.
Okay.
It can be, and
Hmm.
when they've targeted someone else, at least they're not bothering you,
Right.
and
Right.
a lot of people I've spoken to, one woman told me, say, I hope everybody forgives me, but I'm throwing them back in the dating pool. She doesn't want this person, but sometimes they come back,
Mm.
sociopaths. And that's one of the questions that people ask, do they return? And the answer is some of them do and some of them don't, because one of the things that happens is that once they realize that they found somebody that they can get something out of, whatever it was that they wanted,
Right.
they figure, well, if they need more, they'll try it again. And I've had people, who got rid of a sociopath and then 6 months later, they're starting to feel good and these people just seem to have radar for
Oh
when
my
you
gosh.
might be yes, when
Yeah.
you might be receptive to them. And they show up again. And then the survivor's like, "Oh, well, we can just be friends." Again, no, 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 no.
Right.
There is friends,
No,
I mean, no contact is forever. I mean,
that's right. It don't
that's
count
yeah,
the word no, right? There's no
right,
contact. Exactly.
correct.
I was wondering, like, with regards to what's one myth, about sociopaths and the narcissists, that you could, or that maybe you might think in terms of could be permanently debunked.
All sociopaths are serial killers.
Oh, very good.
Yes,
My,
yes.
really?
And psychopaths. I mean, a lot of people believe that a psychopath or a sociopath is a serial killer. And the fact is that most psychopaths or sociopaths never kill anybody. And, the number who actually are serial killers is, the people who do this probably are psychopaths, but they're
Mhm.
so minuscule compared to the 12% of the population, who have these
Mhm.
personality disorders. So that's an important one.
Wow. Mind blowing. We could talk for a long time, but yeah, but time is of the essence here. And I was thinking in terms of, what gives you hope today, both, like in your work for the women and the men that you serve, because you do.
Healing is possible. Recovery is possible. It can be a bumpy ride,
Hmm.
especially when you're excavating old pains, the things that made you vulnerable
Right?
to the sociopath, but you absolutely can recover from it, and you can move on. And I have. You
Yeah.
mentioned briefly in the introduction. I guess it was about a little over a year after my divorce. I met a man, and we started going out, and just a couple months ago, we celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary.
Wow. That in itself gives me hope.
Mhm.
And I'm sure it will give many other people listening to this hope because yeah, it's that trust thing, right? And like you say, you have, with regards to your webinars and all the work that you've done and been through and give out to others to it's a roadmap. It's a roadmap. And it's wonderful. How, can I ask you how did you know? How did you know that you were going to be good with this gentleman that's your husband and have
Well, I knew that I would never get taken again.
Oh, okay.
I just knew, once I realized what had happened to me, I just knew that it wasn't going to happen again.
Right.
Plus I did the work
Mhm.
and the emotional work, and it took a while, and there was a lot to release. So he was cool. My husband Terry, he was just wonderful. And in fact, we met at a bar in Philadelphia. I went with my sister,
Mhm.
and he kind of, the place was packed, and he waved us over and bought us drinks and everything, and my sister left, and I said, "Okay, goodbye," and I closed the bar, which I hadn't done in years.
Good conversation.
Yes, and so, he was just a regular guy, and on our first date, we actually went to a fancy restaurant in a casino in Atlantic City, and so we sat there in the banquette, and I told him my story. He almost fell out of the banquette, or at least he ordered another martini, I guess. Um, but it didn't scare him off, you
Oh,
know? And so, later on, we had more dates and we got together, but essentially he admired my strength in overcoming this. And so, we kept hanging out, and here we are after 20
oh.
years of marriage.
That's just so heartwarming. I love it. I just really love it because, I do know of other women and that have been through horrific experiences and they just have some of them have such a nasty vibe about ever getting involved or trusting and I can't wait to share not just this podcast but your information with them because it does give hope. We are meant to love and be loved, right? And so
Yes.
very
Yes.
heartwarming that you
Yes.
have that experience and that you have that to share with others, especially because of what you've been through and overcome. And now what you do, it's just so needed in the world because more and more I am, running into women that have not had great experiences. Yeah. So I really honestly am so grateful that you took the time to be with me today. And for our audience, because it is our audience now, I'm really looking forward to sharing you with our audience and they'll be able to get in touch because I will have all the information about you where they can reach you and how they can contact you. so
Okay.
so yeah, thank you so much, Donna. It's just been really a very heartwarming experience and one of true hope. really.
Well, thank you so
So,
much,
oh,
Colli.
yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it, and it's my honor to talk to you
Oh, thank you
and your
so much.
audience.
And we will talk again. We will. Thank you so
Okay.
much.